started flying, I had to work to keep from dying, especially since I came to Vietnam. Seems on every combat sortie, that's when Charlie tried.
My name is William John Maki. I am a retired major in the Air Force. I graduated in '63, and of course that meant if you were a young able male, you'd probably get drafted and go to Vietnam. Or if you got a job, you'd probably get drafted and go to Vietnam. So I went to Kent State and got a degree in geography with 2 minors, biology and geology. And still knew that when I got my degrees and got out, the odds were you'd still get drafted and go to Vietnam. So I went to the ROTC route and signed up and was accepted and did the 2 years, junior and senior year. Got my active duty notice like 10 days after graduation and wound up going to Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois, I think it is. It's now closed, and they did maintenance officer training there. So I was there from summer '67 to right at Christmas of '67. Next set of orders was to go to Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, at Oklahoma City, and I wound up going to the air base, the air wing, air base group. They had their own assigned aircraft, all recip engines. And of course I've been working on recip engines since I was probably 14 years old. And so I was the aircraft maintenance officer for that group. We also handled all the transit aircraft, and Tinker was a hot spot because jets could take off from the East Coast, come to Tinker, land gas up, and then jump and go over to Rockies, head to the West Coast. Perfect mid-route refueling. And then I talked with the engineers over at the depot, and of course the big push then was B-52 tail structure problems. They had the tails cracking off due to the way the aircraft was being used, and so they had to strengthen the tails. And that was an interesting structural instruction by the engineers to me. So I also got my pilot's license and was interviewed by somebody from the government, and I had a set of orders to go to NKP. Nobody knew where it was. You just had a set of orders and a APO number. And
at that time, NKP was top secret.
It was still classified. So nobody knew where I was going, and 2 weeks to get my act together and report for duty and get on an airplane and go over to NKP, wherever that was. Thailand, they said. So going over in August of 1970, a lot of troops on that airplane. It was a contract charter airplane. You had Army and Air Force, and people were happy, and they were passing out peanuts and soft drinks. Finally get into Bangkok, land, process in, have a night in the town, and then process in to get on the airplane, the C-130 that flew to all the bases, dropping people off, picking people up. It was called the Klong. And the reason it's called the Klong is because in Thailand, Klong is the canal, and everything moves on the canal. All the little boats and everything. So I guess the military guys called it the Klong because everything moved on the Klong between the bases. So next morning I come into the processing point, and the sergeant in charge is reading off names. He says, okay, you guys are going to Utapao. Get over here, get in a group, go over there. Next group of names is Udon. And same thing, he works his way through the bases. And kind of off on the side in the corners were 4 security policemen. Big guys with truncheons. And he says, now the rest of you guys are going to NKP, and I don't want any trouble I don't want any fighting. I don't want any chairs thrown. So apparently NKP at that point had a real tough reputation. And the security policeman standing there in the corners watching everybody, making sure nobody did anything unusual. So we were all nice, quiet little boys, and waited for him to call us out by name and to get in line and to go out to the Klong.
How old were you at that point?
At that point, I was 24 years old.
You were probably pretty senior at that point compared to the rest of the guys.
Yeah. Compared to the young troops that were being drafted in. So we get on the Klong, make the stops, and of course, NKP is the last stop of the day. It's fairly late in the day. I get off. There's a personnel NCO waiting to take people in and the processing people. He gets to me, looks at what he's got in the paperwork, and he assigns me to the C-123 candlestick operation, which is going out at night, dropping flares over the trail to highlight movement so they could stop equipment coming down the trail at night. So I get assigned over to a hooch, as it's called, which is a little 4-man bunk room with a little area out front, and put my gear in there. And I'm on the base, found out what a mess hall was, went in and had a meal, because it's pretty well operational around the clock, I found out. And then I walked down to the maintenance areas on the flight line. And the first shop I got into was the hydraulic shop. And I walk in there and a sergeant calls the room to attention, and I said, well, okay, carry on. I'm your new maintenance officer. I'd like to see your shop layout. So he's walking me around the shop layout, and the management questions: how many people on this shift, how many people in the other shifts, how much work do you do in a day, how many aircraft do you work, do you go out to the flight line, is it all shop work? And as I'm going down the equipment line, I'm looking at some of the repaired brakes. They were probably, they're repaired brakes. I don't know if they were, I can't remember if they're A1 or 123s, but they had a lot of those aircraft on the field. And I noticed that the safety bolts are wired in reverse. So when the aircraft vibrates, any aircraft vibrates a lot, and you have safety wire through the heads of bolts to keep the bolt from backing out. And somebody had wired it in reverse, so now the bolt could start to back out. So I asked the NCOIC, I said, let me have a pair of dikes. He saw what I was looking at. He said, oh no sir, we'll take care of that. I said, no, I asked for a pair of dikes. And I went and cut all the safety wires on a series of brakes, handed them the dikes, and I said, now, these need to be fixed by the morning, before the morning goes, whatever's coming up next. You need to find out who did this and put that person retraining on what's left and what's right. And I'll be back tomorrow after I checked in. So I said, I need to be escorted to the next shop. Well, got to the next shop and they were waiting for me. So obviously the NCOIC of hydraulic shop had sent one of the airmen down, line up the troops because you got a firecracker coming. And I went through the shops, looking at stuff, checking on tools, finding out names. And it was probably like 2 in the morning when I turned in. So got up and processed in with the field maintenance squadron. And I remember walking in, presenting myself to the colonel in charge, and the first sergeant was there. And the first sergeant said something to the effect, oh, we know you're here. So the word had already gone through the squadron. So I signed in, got assigned my duties, this and that, and started inspecting aircraft. I'd been working on aircraft, like I said, since I was about 13 years old. So, what do I remember about NKP?
What was your first impression when you got off the aircraft?
It was not like any base I was expecting. I mean, I'd never seen, it was like a civilian airfield, all different types and models of aircraft. It wasn't like we were being told, well, there's a bomber base and a fighter base and a tanker base. And it was everything. I could not believe how many different aircraft there were, all spread out on this huge perforated steel plate parking area. PSP, they call it, perforated steel plate. And it was long. It was good to have trucks there so you could take troops up and down back to the revetments if it was an A1, or out to the helicopter lines, the Hueys. We had these funny little Piper Cubs called QU-22Bs. Come to find out, they were assigned to Project Alpha. Nobody knew what Project Alpha was. What the U.S. had decided to do was drop electronic listening devices cleverly disguised in plastic leaves along the trail. And they would transmit any sound or vibration, and the QU-22 was basically an electronic listening aircraft that would fly up around 20,000 feet, and collect the data and send it back to Project Alpha, which was a guarded facility full of computers, and they took all the data and, now we say, crunched it and analyzed it. And they could figure out how many troops were coming down and how many trucks were coming down and when they were active and where they were at. And they could feed that info back out to the flight line to drop some bombs. C-123s could put flares down at night. A-1s could drop bombs. They could call in fast movers, the jets, to drop napalm and bombs. So it was all electronic, highly hush-hush. What else was in there? HH-3s, HH-53 helicopters for the rescue groups.
You had a few Pedros there too, didn't you?
Pardon?
You had a few Pedro helicopters there as well, the little K-Max.
Well, they had
They use those for fire suppression.
fire suppression. Yeah, there was a fire suppression group, rescue. They originally were used for picking up pilots in Laos, but they didn't have the range. And so they went to the HH-3 and 53s, much better rescue helicopters. We have a poster out here of all the aircraft are at NKP. A-26s, boy, they were loaded for bear. Good truck killers on the trail. It was very, very busy. Much busier than any standard U.S. Air Force Base as far as that went. Talking to one of the personal protective equipment people here that are at the conference, you know, you'd normally have helmets and flight suits and stuff for fighter pilots or bomber pilots or tanker pilots. With all those different types of aircraft, the suits and helmets and gear were altogether different. Biggest personal protective equipment shop that he had ever been assigned to.
Later on in the war, I believe, was it the F-105 or the F-5? The helmets were actually fitted to the pilots' heads. They weren't. They made that
weren't
transition.
generic. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't generic anymore.
Yeah.
So it actually had to be fitted, and all the comms were in there. That was.
No, that was the ops side, the flight side. I was more on the maintenance and maybe munitions. So, what did we do? One day the troops said, you know, there's a rumor you could fry an egg on the wing of an aircraft. It was so hot. So the next day I brought an egg from the mess hall. We cracked it on a wing, airplane. It was like in the afternoon. So the aircraft was good and hot. Yes, the white of the egg did cook. The yolk, soft cooked, you know, over easy type. It was still runny.
How hot would you say the temperature was then, if it was able to do that?
I don't know, 100, 105. I mean, we're out in the open in the sun during the dry season. Your fatigue shirt would be open, or you'd just be wearing a t-shirt, or maybe not even a shirt. For the troops, for the officers, you had to stay dressed up in your fatigues. I was trained on the Yankee extraction system for the A1s because the aircraft did not have an ejection seat, was never built for that back in the 50s. And the only way to safely leave the aircraft for an aircrew member was to pull the canopy lever, have the canopy flip off, and then jump over the side of the cockpit and roll off the wing and pull your chute. Well, that wasn't good enough. So what they did, they designed a rocket behind the seat of the pilot. And the rocket literally would blow right through the canopy, shatter it, and had like a 200-foot cord, which was on spooling, and it was hooked to the back of the pilot, not the seat, the pilot, and literally yanked the pilot right off his seat. All right, and now you're riding this rocket up, and it fizzles out and cuts free, and you're the pilot, and you're still sort of upright because you've been going this way. You pull your chute handles, and hopefully you land somewhere safely. Ingenious extraction system, but you're riding a live rocket as a crew member, and I had to be trained on that in the States before I went over. I was the guy that did the final inspections and signed off on that system before the pilot could take the airplane.
How did they train you on that system?
They had an A1 and a seat and a rocket with no fuel, and what we did was remove the seat and put the rocket in and reinstall the seat and hook everything up, and then go back and QC it, and then we'd take it off the next day and do it again until that became almost like a ritual. You knew every step of what had to be done to put that thing in, what had to be done to take it out, what had to be looked at before a flight of an aircraft. So I was the Red X, clear the aircraft for flight on the Yankee system.
Wow, that is a legendary system.
It is.
In the aviation industry. As a matter of fact, in the Dayton Museum, where they're going to do the Southeast
Asia recovery, rescue recovery. Yeah.
There was a lot of talk because they couldn't even find documentation on the Yankee extraction system because they had to rebuild one from scratch. God, I wish they'd known you then. That would have been a lot easier for those poor guys.
I have gotten rid of a lot of stuff I picked up in the military. I don't think I have anything left on that system. I don't know. I have to go look. Anyway.
That's still very interesting.
So we had 3 major operations while I was there during the dry season. Of course, that was the major operation time. You really couldn't fly that good in a monsoon. We didn't have ground avoidance radar at the times for the crews. Flying in a monsoon, other than taking off and getting above altitude, was pretty dangerous. We tried to go over into Laos or to go to a Lima site, which was a whole nother set of operations under Air America.
Since you brought that up, let's go into Lima sites if you could. What is your knowledge of the Lima sites and how what did you supply there? Anything with the Lima sites?
Well, the Lima sites were originally set up for clandestine operations or ways to bring in equipment for the Royal Laotian Army, because they didn't have much of an air force, and these were set up in the late 50s and prepared. And I'm wondering, sometimes they probably used water buffalo and a hoe or something, or a plow to clean off a field and try to make it level. They were scattered throughout Laos and down the tail of Laos. They all had numbers, locations. Some were fairly short field landings. You could get a Cessna in there.
Some of the Stoll porters could pull that off.
And the coal porters could pull that off, yeah.
Or a helicopter, but if you had
a helicopter wouldn't have a problem getting in there. Question is, as you flew in, was the site still friendly? So they had code words for the Laotian military personnel, and you would give them a code word and they'd come back with a proper code word, meaning it's safe to land. If you didn't get the right code word or you didn't get a reply, you didn't land. You came back with all your equipment in the aircraft. What went on then? Well, rifle ammunition, grenades, some mortar rounds, MREs. Well, they weren't MREs. They were K-Rats. God, I can still see those things. We'd be working on a line and a truck would come by and got 5 guys, and they'd throw us 5 boxes of K-Rats and move on to the next. And you open them right there and eat right there. You learn to love Spam. Still hate the Christmas cake. What the hell is that?
Pound cake.
Pound cake. I don't think I'll ever eat a piece of pound cake. I don't care who makes it. So you'd fly in, unload, or there'd be a person who'd get out. And this would be CIA, State Department, somebody, special ops, rangers, helping, assisting.
Lima sites were highly sought after targets by the Vietnamese because of their clandestine operations.
Right. I mean, that was a source of supply for the Laotian army, and if they could knock out a Lima site, then that meant they weren't getting their supplies, and easier for North Vietnam to get over there. So we went through the dry season. We had 3 major operations. I mean, it was so busy with the candlesticks and the A1s and the helicopters. We had a AC-119 come in. I remember that gunship. I don't remember an AC-130 coming, but the AC-119s were there for a while. We got C-123 handoffs from the ranch hand program. And these were pretty well used aircraft. So we wanted to do an inspection on them. So we did. Well, I did. We got the troops out there. We depaneled some of the lower sections of the C-123s. And when they came off, clouds of dried Agent Orange just blew across the ramp. And I'm going, this is, So then we had to take scrapers and scrape the crud off of the ribs of the aircraft. And all that's on the ground. And now we're down to the metal, and we could grind on it to see how badly pitted or corroded it was. Well, in some cases, we had like 3 aircraft open at a time. We said, we're going to have to, we need to call depot on this. I mean, this amount of corrosion is kind of significant. So that program started on we didn't, it's like the don't ask, don't tell. We didn't open up the rest. We just made them, they'll fly. And they go out and drop flares. And you just don't do high G jinks to stress the airframe. And so that was an ongoing program with Depot to either clean up the corrosion and certify that this aircraft is still structurally sound, put panels back on, and fly it. Or no, they'd bring over some other parts from other C-123s, replace a rib that was really badly corroded around the bottom of the aircraft, and then turn it back over to us to reassemble and let them fly again.
Where was the corrosion coming from? Do you think Agent Orange was coming?
I think, it was just across the inside bellies of this aircraft, so dried up, almost like dried syrup inside. But because it had been exposed to the water on the outside, got wet in Southeast Asia, this stuff actively started to corrode in there. And
that's very interesting. I had a pilot that flew C-123s, and he was carrying stuff on his first tour, and they would load him up with Agent Orange, and he would fly it up north, drop it off. They would put prisoners on the plane, send it back. But when I saw the first, he took a lot of 8mm film, and it was just, it looked like a shipyard of those barrels everywhere.
Oh, yeah, the 55-gallon drums of Agent Orange,
Yeah.
They'd pump it into the stuff on the bladders, whatever, on the aircraft, put it in the wings, and then go out and spray the jungle with it.
But then it would get inside the aircraft, and it would
actually they had leaks everywhere,
Huh. Wow, that's amazing.
I mean, to put a piece of plumbing into an aircraft with hydraulic lines and hydraulic fittings, well, that's fine if it's a designed structure. But if you're making it ad hoc, which is what the guys in Vietnam did, they just put plumbing together and run it out to the wings and this and that. Things vibrate on an aircraft, just like on those bolts on the brakes. And I'm sure they, over time, some of the couplings loosened up and it started leaking. Not that it's spraying everywhere, but it's dripping out elsewhere other than where it should be off the wings, where they had the spray bars. So that's why you had all that crud sitting in the belly of the aircraft. So
when they would have a SAR or troops in contact, how hard would your teams have to work to keep those aircraft running?
like I said, I remember sleeping out behind the revetments. If I did a 16-hour day and we got sea rats thrown at us, go out and poop in the back, almost flight line, sleep sitting up against a revetment until you get woke up to do something like, oh, hey, wake up, Captain, we got to go check out Yankee system, got 2 airplanes to go. So that was the big push then. That went by in a blur. I mean, you're working so long. So what else about the SARs? Well, when you got the A1s going off, loaded for a rescue, and the helicopters following behind them, you just wait. You know, you hope the helicopter comes back with the pilot, air crew that they rescued. You hope the Sandies come back.
Did you lose any crew? Any pilots or crew that you remember that were helicopters or aircraft when you were there?
Not that I remember. No, I mean, maintenance was over here, and the ops guys were over here, and it was so you're not supposed to talk to anybody. I mean, the classified stuff said don't tell them, don't ask, don't wonder, just do your job, and.
So they kept you totally compartmentalized.
Yes.
So there's no crossing over.
Crews did not talk to the crew chief when they came back to tell them how the airplane was working. They would just write up stuff in the aircraft form and say, well, this seems to be broke or this isn't working right. And of course, the aircraft crew chief would go around in the aircraft and call us in. Oh, we got some bullet holes damage here in the aircraft. So, all right, now we got to inspect, pull that panel off. We got to go look what's under, what else the bullet went through, fix things in there, get it back to operational status, put the panels back on. Maybe the paint shop could throw a quick spray paint on there so it matched, and off it went. So, be it a helicopter or an A1 or a 123, keep them up, keep them flying.
I noticed, it wasn't Thailand, but I noticed a lot of Army helicopters, you would see a yellow patch where they didn't have paint.
Right.
Was that a primer, do you think?
That is the primer. The yellow is a primer.
Oddly
If you
enough,
didn't have time to paint it all up,
Yep.
prime it, let it sit. Depends on how humid it is.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a dry time, then you could put it on there 6 hours later, spray paint it with the regular OD green. But if it's humid, you just sort of want to protect it, put some primer on and let it go.
You would notice that those were right around the doors. Always right around
Yep.
the doors. You'd see a lot of those right underneath the pilot. It was like a ring they were shooting at all the
Yep,
time.
shooting
So
all the time.
The VC gunners knew where they were trying to hit.
Yeah.
So, let's see, and you were there 70, 71?
Yes, I came in August of 70, and then was notified that actually August 70, yeah, July 71, ordered to report back to the States to go and do Titan II ICBMs, nuclear tipped warhead type missiles. So back to the States. First duty station was Wichita Falls for training, and then Vandenberg Air Force Base for training. And then my duty assignment was McConnell Air Force Base in Kansas, which has a Titan ring around it, which has now been deactivated. And I served as a crew commander for launch crew. I served as a missile trainer operator. We had like a simulator, like for the pilots, simulator of the control room and the support room that were in the silos. And I took over as the superintendent of that trainer. And every month I added something new to make it more realistic. For instance, there would be a large box on the wall with the big circuit breaker handles. Well, in order to turn it on and off, you had to have a big, long, electrically grounded pole and then switch that up and down. Well, they didn't have that. The instructors would say, well, show us how you turn this off, and the person would simulate it. So I got an electrical pole for them, so now they could actually do it. my background because of electronics, that comes in later. But anyway, my background, I took a circuit breaker panel that had come out of scrap, rewired it, put it on a wall in the lower section, and wired it up so you could get 6 volts, 12 volts, 24 volts, 110 volts, 240 volts. So instead of going up to a blueprint and putting your voltmeter pins on it, and then the guy would tell you what your reading was with a card, you actually open this panel up, put your voltmeter leads on actual circuit breakers, and the meter would move to whatever it was set up, whether it was the proper setting, saying this is okay, or no, there's a problem on this circuit and you're only reading, say, 18 volts when it should be 24. So I made the training very realistic for crews going in there. Then I became a sector commander. Well, I made major at that time. Sector commander over 3 missiles. Then
Where were you when you were sector commander? What part of the country?
Well, in a missile squadron, you have the squadron commander, and you have 3 sector commanders. Each sector commander is in charge of 3 silos. And you're sort of going out there because now you were a trained crew member to do inspections, make sure certain things are being done, the appearance of the launch centers. You're basically a manager for 9 different crews because you had 3 crews assigned. There was 1 on duty, 1 waiting to come on duty, and 1 just off duty. So you had all those people to manage and other things that are going on in their life. The enlisted guys, were they getting their training done? Were they getting their OJT training, their book training done so they could advance the next rank? For the officers, you had training for theirs. Hopefully you'd leave the missiles and go on to some other field, maybe. You could always move from Titans to Minuteman, all right? Or maybe go up on the SAC Airborne Command Post at the time.
At that time, SAC was huge. Their thought process was bombers, nuclear missiles. They had changed the entire scope of the Air Force, correct? They were looking to go big, and so like in Southeast Asia, they were not looking at fighter aircraft anymore. Their whole thought process changed to nuclear.
Taking the B-52s out of the nuclear option, which we had, and assigning them down to PACAF and loading them up with iron bombs was something SAC had not ever thought they were going to be iron bombing again. But here we went in with Linebacker and bombed North Vietnam quite a bit with iron bombs to, or they did the carpet bombing areas, which opened up a lot of ground. The Arc-Light, and the North Vietnamese soldiers said they were in absolute fear of being hit by an Arc-Light mission because the bombs were everywhere, like a carpet bomb, cluster bombing, and they had no place to hide because these things went down and blew huge craters on the ground. So yeah, that operational bombing coming back compared to what we were doing with F4s, F5, 105s, Wild Weasels. So anyway, I left the missile field and got assigned as the avionics officer for a bomber tank, B-52 bomber, KC-135 wing in Arkansas, which has since been closed. And took over the avionics. And on the B-52, all aircraft have radios and radars. I mean, that's, and lights and everything else. But the B-52 has electronic countermeasure systems. And they are quite extensive on what they can jam or spoof another radio or radar. And that was probably half of the shop was ECM. And that's about all I really can say about it. I mean, it's highly classified still as to what we can do.
Well, the B-52, they make jokes about that, Eric. I know you've probably seen the meme on the internet with the Starship Enterprise being retired and a B-52 escorting it to its retirement. The B-52 is an absolute legend in what it can do and what it can be converted into.
Can be adapted into. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, all right. So anyway, the squadron commander for that avionics squadron retired, and they had no one to come in. So I took over as the interim squadron commander for about 6 months, and then I got orders for Europe, and I got sent to a fighter wing in Europe, and was the chief maintenance officer there. And they had birds on alert, and of course I already had my nuclear weapons clearance and classifications and all that kind of stuff.
What year would that be?
I went to Europe in 81.
Height of the Cold War.
Oh yeah. We were studying elbow to elbow with the Army.
Had the A-10s come into your...
Not in my field that I know of, no.
I know they were developing them, and the whole thought behind the A-10 was anti-tank warfare.
Yes, oh yeah.
The whole thing was Europe. That was going to be the next battleground.
And we often joked because, and this is still true, study your enemy. Russia has a tremendous problem of alcohol abuse. And we were saying, we don't need to fight a war, we just need to put cases of whiskey about every mile or 5 kilometers along the roads, and they'll never get more than 10 miles into the German area because they'll be too drunk to operate their tanks and stuff. And it really is still, Russia is a case as far as their society goes. But anyway, back to Europe. So NATO, I have a background or can get by in German and French. Had TDYs around NATO. Converted. They had the F-4G Wild Weasel unit there, and that is the aircraft system where F-4G number 1 goes up, and the enemy turns on their radar to pick you up. He dives back down, and the next F-4 comes up, but he's got anti-radiation missiles, which will fire and work on radars. So anti-radiation. So these two aircraft doing this, that's why they're called the wild weasels, because weasels pop their heads up and this and that. So they do this and they find a radar, and the second guy shoots the HARM, high-speed anti-radiation missile, and it takes out the radar set for that anti-aircraft missile battery, or maybe it's a radar-controlled gun unit. And we deployed. Went down to Zaragoza, Spain for training. Went into Egypt for training at the time.
Wasn't that about the time of the 12-Day War in the 80s? Was it 11-Day? 11-Day, 12-Day?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can't remember. So anyway, finished up my tour there in 85, came back to the States in 87. I had asked for, please send me to a base where there's no snow. Every base I'd been at, other than Southeast Asia, had snow. So they put me in Homestead, Florida, and they were in the middle of converting from F-4s to F-16s. And we'd already done this at one squadron in Europe, so I already knew the drill to go through and what to order, this and that. And it was the same time they were coming up with the GPS system. No, pardon me, not GPS. They came up with a security system for aircraft radios. So instead of you going to channel 1 and your buddy being on channel 1 and you're talking back and forth, and that can be intercepted and jammed, they developed a little set of computer rules that you'll go to channel 1 and your buddy will be in channel 1. And then at a set time, you'll go to channel 3 and he'll go to channel 3. And another set time, you go to channel 7, he goes to 7. So by skipping the frequencies, it became almost impossible to jam because you weren't on a frequency long enough to be picked up to jam on that frequency. They're skipping all around. Well, they weren't getting the parts. They needed these parts to be installed in the aircraft, but they weren't getting them.
Is that in the F-15s?
The F-16s.
Oh, F-16, I'm sorry.
F-16. So I had to go over to the supply squadron, and we had to look at this. And I found a paperwork problem and fixed it, and we got the aircraft stuff in. That was called Have Quick, I think, was a project name. So anyway, all aircraft have it now, pretty much jam-proof, because they all get logged in at the same time with the same program, what to skip on that day, based on GMT time, and it's just a standard now. But back then it was breaking technology.
State of the art back then.
Yeah, so I retired in '87 and stayed in the Ready Reserve and went up to Ohio.
Couldn't stay out of the cold, could you?
Couldn't stay out of the cold. Well, the wife didn't like Florida because of the gecko lizards running around eating bugs and whatnot. And she sort of missed the cold, I guess. So we came back up to Ohio. And, but I stayed on, getting pulled in for updating on technology. In '97, I finally got my final discharge, 30 years, 67 to 97. And was working with a civilian company. And then in 2001, I got my orders to reactivate after the Twin Towers went down. Get ready to deploy.
Did they bring you back as a major?
Oh yeah, I would be going back in. And my technical specialty was chemical warfare, because that's what I had also picked up in Europe. Even though we didn't have chemicals, we were prepared to counter them. And everybody had chemical warfare suits and training and this and that, and how to decontaminate an aircraft and whatnot. and if you were dusted with chemicals, how to decontaminate your runways and your bomb shelters and your everything out there, POL dumps.
From your perspective, how likely did you think that would be an option at that time? When we were heading over there, what was your
we
thought
still
process?
had NATO versus Warsaw. And in warfare, everything's fair in love and war. So if Russia wanted, or the Warsaw Pact decided they wanted to employ a chemical weapon to neutralize a base, well, then we've got to stop. We've got to clean up and protect our people, and we've got to maybe employ a chemical weapon also going the other way. So that made me chemical weapon certified. And but luckily, that war was over quickly. So I got the orders to stand down. And I haven't been called back for active, getting too old to go on active duty anyway. I don't think there's anything else in my background.
That is quite an interesting career.
Let me know when you turn this stuff off.
Oh, no, then you'll tell me the real stuff.
I'll tell you something else.
I understand.
So,
I understand that completely. You're not the first to say that, by the way.
Right. So,
My question,
was it interesting? Yeah. You have to have an eye for detail and maintenance. Like when I walked into that shop after being on the airplane all that time and walking in there at night and the night shift's on and finding improper maintenance and getting it corrected, not the next day, immediately. And so when I came out to an aircraft with a crew chief, they knew they had a inspector on their hands. There was a famous, to me, famous F4 in Europe. He was called Arnold the Pig. And this airplane would go up and fly, do whatever they want. It's great. Come down, land, yeah, flew great. Next time it flew, the radar didn't work. Or they got warning lights in one of the panels. Well, maybe you had a pilot in the front and a weapon system in the back. Or you'd have some other problem, like couldn't get one of the gear, whatever. It was just a hodgepodge of problems. So I knew Arnold the Pig was sick. So I beefed up a weekend crew, had Arnold put it into a bunker. We had big bunkers sheltering the aircraft. I said, well, first thing we're going to do at 6 o'clock is jack up Arnold, put him up on jacks. And then we're going to run Arnold. We're going to power unit, don't have to turn the engines on, plug it in. As far as Arnold is concerned, he's up in the air because the gear are not sensing touching the ground. So Arnold thinks he's flying. We took off, well, I had the guys do it, but I was inspecting too. We took off every panel that Arnold had. He was a piece of Swiss cheese. And I said, now we're going to start working the systems. We're going to work the gear. We're going to work the landing lights. We're going to work the tails. We're going to work the flaps. We're going to work everything. Finally, late in the afternoon, the radar was working, you know, checking for targets, whatever, and it stopped. And we got some red lights in the cockpit. Oh my, let's look at this. So we started looking at all the cabling, which goes to the bulkheads in the aircraft. And sure enough, up around just past the pilot's seat roughly, but behind the radar bulkhead, a chafed cable had about 2 or 3 wires that were chafed that apparently during certain maneuvers or certain vibrations on the aircraft, one of them or 2 of them would short out, causing that temporary problem, which you couldn't duplicate on the ground. So we found that. I tell you, I'm about ready to hop for joy at that point. So we called the wing maintenance officer, chief of maintenance, and I said, we found Arnold's problem, and I think we can't fix it. I mean, we're talking wiring in big bundles. We're talking depot level work. So that's what they did. They had depot come in, kept Arnold up on his jacks, opened up what we could with depot totals we could do. They came in and they rebuilt part of that cable and put it all back together, and Arnold flew without a problem for weeks. It's like, boy, it's a brand new airplane. I was so happy to fix Arnold. And that's what a good maintenance officer can do. He can sit and think and analyze the systems and what's going on. It's a knack. You know, like a good car mechanic, you know, he can listen to an engine and almost tell you exactly what's wrong.
You know you have a good car mechanic when he takes out that 3-foot screwdriver
And puts it on the block.
Yep.
Yep. Sound is a good indicator. I want to say some people have a knack.
Yeah.
All right. You've heard about people maybe back when they had regular wind-up watches, they'd stop the watch. I mean, if whatever electrical field they have, they would stop a watch. I don't want to brag, but I think I have a knack on fixing things, and I can almost feel when an aircraft is sick. All right, and this is the one we need to work on. You know, it's not going to be an easy fix. So, yeah, the have quick radio system, that was a toughie. But an airplane that intermittently has problems, that's your real nut to solve there. That is a tough one.
I'd like to ask you a question, and I usually ask this of each veteran. Would you recommend the military to a young man or a woman today as a career path?
Certainly, because it has gotten much better to have the women on board, because the way women look at things different than guys. Well, and one other thing, women are smaller and they can go down the intakes and check the veins, the intake veins on a jet, and guys wouldn't fit down there, but a small woman would. They're physically smaller and they can reach in and do things that a guy can't do. So there is a definite plus as far as aircraft maintenance goes. Now, as far as shop work goes, same thing. All right, women have good eye-hand coordination, something better than men. So they can repair parts sometimes better than men.
You expanded on their thought process. Could you expand that just a little farther on the difference between men and women and their thought process?
Well, I won't go into the biology of the brain, although that's part of what I've studied. Men and women do have different ways of thinking about things. I'll give you an example. A study once took a group of guys, randomized for age and background, and women, and said, you got to do these 6 things. Women were better at analyzing the sequence of them, and they got more of the 6 things done than the men did. The men were sort of like, well, I'll do this one, and then I'll do this one, and I'll do this one. Whereas the women could sort of interleave the workings of each one and get more done at the end of the same time period. So that's an excellent way of women analyzing problems. Where do we have women now? Jeez, I mean, you know, communications, radar operators, they're on missile crews. I think it just makes for a better balanced force. All right. So the only problem with a woman's side is that she could get pregnant. And now, and many countries and businesses are loosening up on that, saying, yeah, have your baby, take 2 months maternity leave, and then come back on work. I don't know if that means women can't deploy. That's not up to my thing. They can decide that in the personnel office. But yes, having the women on board. We met the young public relations person today on our tour. She was in communications as a military member, and she got out and did some training and came back as a civilian public relations person. Great. So now you got somebody who knows the military, working public relations for this base, and probably doing an excellent job. All right. I think there's big openings for women. They're in the cockpits, they're in the maintenance fields, they're in the missile fields. Unless it's brute force, a woman by law should not pick up an object more than 40 pounds. That will strain her skeletal system, muscle system. A man is relegated to no more than 70 pounds, but we're bigger. Our bones are bigger, our muscles are bigger. So there is the physical difference of what they can physically do. But mentally, I don't see any difference.
Very cool. Was there anything else you'd like to say about your service before we shut down and you tell me what you were going to say?
I had a young man, a relative, ask me, and he's going into the service, tell me about it. I said, you'll never stop learning. I says, because who knows what Russia's going to do or what China's going to do. We may have a friend in South America, but 2 years from now, that company may be an enemy. So you always need to learn the other country. If you can learn languages, do that. Being able to speak anything in a different language makes it a lot easier to communicate. You never stop learning about technology. Technology and science, leaps and bounds, are changing our environment as we go. Look at what the computer's done since I started in the 60s. Key coding by punching little holes in a card, going through card readers, and now we have AI, artificial intelligence, starting to come online.
How do you see that evolving? Are you excited for that?
I'm sort of excited, but there's got to be some real strong reins put on that program.
I heard the Navy has a drone that is programmed with artificial intelligence. It will take off from a carrier, it will refuel other planes in flight, and land on the carrier by itself.
Yes, the Navy refueler drone, yes. Yeah, easy to do. No reason to put a crew up there if you're just going to have it fly out a couple 100 miles from the carrier, hook up and fuel an aircraft so it can stay on station further out and they come back and refuel the drone. The drone refueler can land again and take off and go the other way. So you can keep your aircraft off the carrier, which is a target for anti-ship missiles and everything else, keep your guys out there flying, providing a bigger, wider area of projection of force.
But as you say, need some tight reins on AI as it's coming, or you gotta have a hold of it.
You got to have a hold of it. Let's hack that drone that's carrying fuel. Now let's hack it and turn it against the carrier so it crashes into the island of the carrier. I mean, you can turn that asset into a weapon real quick. So you've got to have tight reins. You've got to make sure, well, it's a hack proof. Somebody's going to be trying to, yeah, somebody's going to be trying to hack that program. All right.
Anytime somebody says that to me in the business I'm in, technology, I say it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
There's somebody out there today on every single problem trying to break through that door, and you give them enough time and enough horsepower in their computer, and they'll get through that door.
There's an old management maxim that says, if you hear footsteps, it's the person running behind you that's going to pass you in whatever field you're in, whether you're in the food business or the clothing business or the car business. Somebody's going to find a better way to make that mousetrap and put you out of business, and they're going to take over. So the same thing is true in programming. Same thing is true in programming. Yeah, there's going to be big changes. Electric vehicles versus hydrogen-fueled vehicles. Electric vehicle taxi cabs that will fly and cover an area to move you around a city by air versus driving a cab through the ground. Who knows? Who knows? It's going to be interesting.
Yes, it is. I want to say thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Not online.
Not online. All right. Everybody, you're all going to miss this, but we're going to have a good time without you. Thanks.